welcome back to episode 14.
Yep.
Looks like we took a week off for the 4th of July holiday, so happy birthday to America, and we're back and we're cooking.
Yeah. Lots to
I
talk
think
about.
there's a couple things that we really want to go through here today that we've thought are kind of interesting to talk about. We want to talk about Elon buying Cursor, Google, what they're doing or not doing, as the case may be, delaying Gemini again, losing a bunch of researchers, stock is off. And there's really four things that kind of come to mind, and we'll try to, wrap them all into one, which is, why Google stalled, how you own the developers, how you can sort of get out of that escape hatch. How do you get out of paying forever for inference? And then ultimately, kind of what the mood in AI is. Now, I've been at this a while, as you have, Anthony, and I've seen lots of things change. And we've seen an incredible amount of news recently. New models coming out. Fable 5 still with us, not gated. A new model out of Grok. A new model out of OpenAI. Lots of news, and every time you get one of these weeks or two, you sort of realize that it's becoming less and less impactful because we're getting used to it. So, with that, let's talk about the guy that didn't ship a model last week or didn't really make any news, which is Google, and why they're seem to be stalled for whatever reason. I mean, if you sort of look at it in terms of momentum, I mean, Google's like, they might be a -3. That it's out of 10. Like, if OpenAI is 10 out of 10 this past week, and Anthropic is 7 or 8 out of 10, Google is low single digits at best, and it may be negative. 4 researchers gone, almost an enormous swath off their market cap, $200 billion plus. I mean, these are the guys that own the chips. They have pretty much the best research out there. They have a great image model, and it's still stalling. Coding
Yeah.
seems to be the thing that they're not in.
I mean, they bought like Windsurf, and they have this product called anti-gravity, which just is, I don't think people are clicking with it. Like, I certainly haven't. And there's just, I think Google suffers from it. I think it's just kind of a mess, even though that they have great stuff there. So I think that I use their desktop app. Do you use their desktop app?
Yeah. I use the Gemini app.
Yeah. It's just not as clean or fast as Claude, and I'm using OpenAI a lot less, so I'm mostly in the Claude app. And I think they're just totally different than everyone else. And I think that if you are using one of the other AIs just on the daily driver, Google just doesn't match the way the others feel. And I think you immediately notice that.
Yeah, it's interesting. Just some stats here, right? Anthropic's now 40% of enterprise spend up from like 12 a couple of years ago. OpenAI slipped a little bit as Anthropic's gone up. They're still 27%, but Google's just not in the conversation. And
yeah, they're just not.
And it's sort of weird. I actually use Google a lot for more, like, I'm going to say, more personal questions. I spend a lot of time on my golf swing, and I spend a lot of time querying Gemini, and I get great answers, just as good, if not better, than I get from the others. And so I do have a whole series of conversations I have there. But from a workflow standpoint, I use it, oddly enough, I use it more as a Google killer than I do as a Claude replacement. I use it to ask questions that I was previously asking Google anyway. So I'm sure I'm burning more electricity, burning more input somehow with Google, and getting kind of the same answers. And then the real question is then, how does Hassabis lose 2 of his AlphaFold co-authors to Anthropic? How does Jumper and Pritzel move from sort of, you might argue, what has been early on the premier AI lab with one of the, most stable teams and most stable guys, and those guys just jumped to Anthropic. Like, if you can't keep the people you won the Nobel Prize with, comp's not the problem.
Yeah, it's not comp.
There's some
This,
other problem there, right?
yeah, yeah.
Um, and I think the interesting thing to me is that Google's always had great products that have succeeded despite their UI to some degree. Gmail is, it's not exactly lovely UI, right? But it's everywhere. And everything they do is sort of built by engineers for engineers, but they don't seem to have built the one product that engineers want now, which is the ability to do the coding. So, why do you think that is? Is it too many products?
I mean,
Too
Google. I would actually say that Google actually has bad products. Like, um,
okay.
you know what I mean?
Great search, bad products for everything else.
I mean, yeah. I mean,
You
like search, like up until AI coming out, search was kind of a mess, right?
It
I
was
mean,
getting messier, that's for
you
sure.
used it. You used it because it was pretty. They pretty much won the search game. So, and it's default on your iPhone. Um, but like, you just get increasingly more ads and just more sponsored stuff. So I think Google actually is really terrific at maintaining what it has. This is my thing is they're not creating groundbreaking products. In fact, OpenAI took the research that DeepMind and Google had made and turned it into a product. So think about that for a second. It's like Google had done the research, they figured all this stuff out, they mothballed it, took all their talent and had them doing something else. And then meanwhile, OpenAI with Elon's direction, you know, changes the world, changes the way computing's working on something that Google really just passed on.
Right.
So they just, I fundamentally think that they're have not the greatest products. I don't think they are actually a product focused company. I think they've gotten so big um, and so rich and an infrastructure and a bureaucracy that really caters to the team's sort of seniority and the way they maintain it, the way they maintain the company. And I think that when they did the code red, hey, we have to start doing AI, they shifted, but they're like kind of 2 or 3 years into it, and you can kind of see they're not operating like their competitors. And I have a question back to you. Um, the one thing that they needed to probably make was a killer coding environment and framework, if you will, like Google, like Claude did, and they didn't do it. And they bought their way into it, and they mixed it up. And I think from an investor standpoint and from a CEO standpoint, they could have read the writing on the wall, which is like early adopters are engineers. Everyone's going to use this for coding. The reinforcement learning will work to make coding better. If we want to own the developer, which will help us sell more cloud resources, we have to win there. And they seemingly just missed it. Like from an executive position, like wouldn't that just be a bad signal to like Wall Street and everybody else? Hence, people wanting to leave the company to go work with a 2-year-old company versus working at a 20-something plus company that can't get out of their own way.
Yeah, and look, it could just be that this is at this point, it's just a focus issue. They have so many different, pieces of the puzzle that everything, if you're in that lab, everything should be focused there as far as you're concerned. And so if your choice is, I can go work on a company like Anthropic where it is the only product, obsessively focused, iterating. Hey, look, my Claude just asked me to relaunch to version 1.120186.1, which happens like 4 times a day for me. Or you can stay at Google and you can talk about YouTube and you can talk about email and you can talk about pictures and the 40,000 other things that these guys do. So yeah,
I mean,
maybe
I think as
maybe
a
that's
research,
it.
yeah, I mean, I think as a researcher, you're really just desperate to do the best research in the world and find the best researchers in the world to work with. with a mission that supports their research. And clearly, you know, Google, if you're losing, you lost two of the main guys, right?
Yep.
And I'm sure that's painful, right? And amongst others, it's not just two; it's like four or six. You have to ask yourself, like, what's going on with the management? It's not comp. It must be focus, or just must be like, I'm a researcher and I can't do what I want to do. And I have a sneaky suspicion that I think Anthropic, with its sole focus and its obsession, I think they've probably figured out. They probably are in with putting distance of what a lot of AI researchers really want to see created is when the model itself can actually uh, train itself to make a better model, and you get into this like loop where
Yeah.
the model is the trainer. And I don't know if like Google or is there. You know what I mean? I don't. I. But what's crazy is you said focus. I actually think Google has the money, has everything that you need, has the talent too. And Hassabis is probably one of the brightest people in the world. If he's allowed to, or if he wanted to, he could probably be as great as Anthropic, pretty much in months' time. But
Yeah, the
they're not
question
moving
is,
that
will
way.
anyone actually yeah, will they let him have the reins? And I guess the answer is no. They're
Currently, it's
just
no. Currently,
yeah,
it's no. And when you look, and what I'm saying is, I think it's a mess. It's like there's a lot of places Gemini exists. They have the app, then they have Studio. I mean, it's just not a friendly place. And then when sometimes you gotta go in and build. It's just not as clean, and your adoption isn't as clean. And that sort of digital friction, the chores that you have to do to get working inside of Gemini, is just enough, and it's not like 10x better than Anthropic. So it's like you're just going to go with like, hey, it's easy for me to start here. Cloud Code is great. It has a CLI. It's you know what I mean, and you just win. And getting developers to switch is not easy. And by the way, I think you started the conversation about Google stalling. Um, and their models not shifting. I mean, they have great models. They could do probably things that are better than others, but it's just you can't get your hands on it,
right.
so you can't
So
talk about it and you
right, so
can't use
they're
it.
they have a gate problem or a bad front door problem or their on ramp is messy or however you want to put it. Uh, the problem is probably not the technology behind it. It's probably not the models. It's probably not
It's
Dennis.
management. It's got to be management.
It's just a question of you know getting the right product in the hands of the people who are going to use it the most, and the people who are going to use it the most are developers, right? And so let's transition a little bit and talk about who actually is winning with the developers.
Can we just before we leave there just for a second? What's interesting to me is you have Google, who was the you know search killer, and then you had Amazon, which was like, I'll send you toothpaste in 10 minutes after you order it. Um, and you had Microsoft, and kind of none of those guys are seemingly winning in AI at all compared to Claude, compared to Anthropic, and compared to like OpenAI. And I think that's really interesting. It goes back to a lot of stuff that you were talking about in the beginning, maybe last year. It was like the Clayton Christensen problem. Even though they haven't moved sufficiently far enough, fast enough, like the others. And that sort of brings us to like one of the best movers in the world. I think you're about to talk about Elon Musk and Grok and Cursor, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, look, I mean, they bought the biggest developer platform effectively in Cursor. They bought it for what seemed to be a very high price of $60 billion, paid out in cash a couple days after the SpaceX IPO in SpaceX stock, when SpaceX stock was over $200. And it's now down, 25% from there. So, you could argue that they actually paid more like $45 billion for it at today's prices. So it seems like a better deal all of a sudden. Still a lot of money either way. But what they got was they really got a couple things. They bought effectively not just a coding tool, but I think they almost bought a toll road, right? 2/3 of the Fortune 500 write code with Cursor. Um, they paid with, you could argue, inflated stock, $4.5 billion in revenue, and doubling or more than that every year. 50,000 clients, writes 150 million lines of code a day. What's crazy is, and I think that that's, what's really amazing to me about that is that they were then able to, within months, train a new Grok model, which shows up and is all of a sudden damn close to the top of the heap on almost every,
Yeah.
um, metric that you want to measure it, from a model that was literally nowhere. I mean, it was nowhere and going backwards. And, it's like if you want to talk about it in F1 terms, they put in an upgrade package one weekend and all of a sudden they were Ferrari and McLaren and Mercedes. And before they were, racing bulls.
Yeah,
Um, it's
I mean,
pretty impressive how quickly they were
ah,
able to do that.
I mean, yeah, I mean, it's impressive, but the Cursor guys have been working on sort of their own little models, to give their users something that is less expensive and fast. They own currently they what most people like about Cursor, in my opinion, is they have the IDE that most developers had been using prior, right? They were using, a lot of people are using VS Code,
Yep,
which funny is actually Microsoft's product,
correct.
right? So it's just crazy that this shows you the example of, like, this group took VS Code, made it better, and won the developer community, and has kept themselves going. And Elon, I think, understanding the Clayton Christensen problem better than anyone, just said, "I'm going to buy them, and I have power, I have chips, I have data center, and now I have an interface that 1 million active developers are using daily, and I can iterate from there." Whereas Google doesn't have any of that. I mean, Google doesn't have 1 million users using a IDE that writes code, and that's a hard group to own. And I know
No,
Google would want to own it. Microsoft lost it to them.
yes.
They still have Git. Now, I think there's some real seismic shifts happening here inside of IDEs. I actually don't think IDEs are the natural resting place for developers. And Cursor's making moves there. They're having cloud agents. So the way that you build code maybe in 10 years will be so much more different than it is now, but you will still be using some sort of human interface. And you might have a lot of coding agents, if you will, in the cloud doing stuff. And I think Cursor and Elon have positioned themselves quite well to move people from where they're at today in an IDE to the future. And I think uh, Anthropic's got the CLI, and they are really dominating there. And I think that they'll move that direction too, because owning developers, which is what Microsoft built their entire business on, was owning the developers, is really key. And I think Microsoft and Google both are not owning the developers.
No, and I think the other thing you have to talk about when you sort of have that conversation about owning developers is, particularly these days with these models, is you have to talk about the economics of this thing. I mean, the new Grok is, $2 in, 6 out versus,
Yeah, free
Anthropic's
and
4.8 is 5 and 25,
right.
and they're using fewer output tokens to finish the job. So, you know, it's really going to come down to sort of cost per outcome ultimately. And I think that what's really sort of scary, if you are somebody who is not Elon, I think he probably is smart enough to, I know he's smart enough to realize this, is that if you have Cursor and you can then route this stuff wherever you want in terms of the inference and the models, and you have a model yourself that you can route to, and you own the data center that model sits in, so your costs are not, I mean, think about the twisted nature of this. If you're on Cursor and you say route it to Anthropic, well, it's getting routed right back to the
Same,
XAI data
yeah,
center where
same
they're
GPU, yeah.
where they're paying you. And so, it's a it's like a lab that routes you to its own cheap model. If that's what ultimately happens, let's just say, you're Anthropic and you route to, Haiku or something like that. You're just you're eating your own margin, right? It's your margin all lives at the very edge of this thing. It's Fable 5 and Mythos, and it's 4.8. And if it's like if you have to route to a lower margin product, you're actually just hurting yourself. If your cursor routing back to Grok in one way or the other, you're
You're
helping
winning.
yourself. You're
Yeah, I
winning.
mean, yeah, I mean, Grok's really, XA. I don't know what to even call them. Do you call them XAI
Yeah,
or you call them SpaceX? I kind of don't
yeah.
even know. But
I'm gonna
it
call him
is,
Grok.
you call them Grok, right? So
Yeah,
like, yeah, if you're a cursor user and you're comfortable with whatever model you're selecting on, um, SpaceX is still making money because because Anthropic's a customer of SpaceX, data centers, right?
yes,
So so for them, they figured out the power position is owning the lowest level of the stack, which is power and GPU. So power and GPU, Elon said, I'm going to own because I know developers need power and GPU to work.
right.
So the labs went there.
Even Google, which makes its own chips, is renting space from Elon.
Yeah, I mean, because at this point, it's a commodity, right? Like everyone bought um, transit bandwidth from everybody, and the big guys. It was always interesting to me when I was watching the Googles and the Facebooks start putting in their own leased lines, their own dedicated circuits globally, because it finally became it was just more effectively cheaper for them to lay the line once and just have it as a huge capex, and then just operate that line, because it's cheaper to route the traffic. And that's kind of where we're at now. It's like the models, they'll buy power and GPU from anybody. Now it's just happens to be your competitor as well. But getting back to your point, I the interesting win that I think Elon should be credited for, obviously funding OpenAI in the very beginning, but finding that he was on the outside and moving to the inside. Think about how his move just compared to like Amazon or Microsoft's moves. I mean, it's stunning, right? He now is selling his GPU and power to the biggest frontier model, Anthropic and Google, and he bought the main interface to most of the developers. And I think that company, Cursor, is a phenomenally managed company, and I think that they're going to continue to own developers and iterate on their product and stay ahead of most of the other companies outside of maybe um, Anthropic Claude. And it's a two-horse race. Yes, I think OpenAI is going to come in. Maybe it's three, but Amazon's not gonna offer anything to them. Google might have just missed it. It's going to be really hard to come in and displace those three. And
Yes.
Microsoft also might have missed it. Think about that. That's a crazy thing. And developer community is not like, oh, I really like Microsoft. They don't really care. I mean, GitLab is also teetering. This is for some people that don't understand all this tech talk. Like all the code is getting deposited into GitHub, which is a Microsoft product, but that is also showing signs of fatigue. In fact, the slowest component of your infrastructure right now could actually be GitHub, which is Microsoft owns, in all their runners. That might be the slowest. The CI, your continuous deployment might be the slowest part, which is GitHub. And I think that we're seeing a potential where the GitHubs of the world and Git as a way to do all your code could actually start seeing its own innovation and displacement. So
Yeah,
that
which would
further puts Microsoft behind.
yeah, that'd be a complete disaster for Microsoft, right? I mean, that'd be if they start to lose a lead there somehow.
In
Yeah.
the developer communities, GitHub is considered one of the slower places to work, and there are developers that are, if you're really in high speed, um, I don't want to call it vibe coding, but you're using agents to develop a lot of code, that they're snapshotting their code old school style with just Unix systems and the rollback is just their snapshot, right? Because right now, like you're using PR workflow, merge, Git workflows, and then you're actually having to run build scripts. That's slow. That's really slow. And if your AI is getting to the point where it's being able to rewrite itself, then just rewrite yourself. We'll snapshot it, and if we need to go back to yesterday, we can. You know what I mean? Because it's going so fast. And so
Yeah.
I think GitHub and what Microsoft owns there is also, I would say, facing challenges. And if they don't do something, you can see most people just not using that in 5 to 10 years. And maybe Cursor actually comes up with a solution.
Yeah, there was a lot of talk on Twitter this morning. Satya from Microsoft had written a
I
piece,
saw that. Yeah, I didn't
which
read
was
it.
a fascinating piece. If you read it, it's about, it basically says that when you send your information into any of these LLMs, any of these
Mhm.
frontier models, you are training them basically. So all the information that you're sending in helps to train them, helps to debug them, so to speak, because you're feeding it human judgment, and the more human judgment you feed it, the less the frontier models actually need you as a customer because they can replicate you because they have all of your judgment. And it's a little it's a little like Karp's from
Yeah,
Palantir's
it's
arguments that he's made, but it's also it's interesting, and it's playing out in what we're talking, right? Grok was trained on the real cursor sessions, right? The latest versions of Grok. So Mythos seems to be the highest benchmark, followed by Fable 5, GPT 5.5, Opus 4.8, and then there's sort of the latest Grok. But Grok was trained on these real sessions, so because they own the tool, they own all the data coming in. And so as long as you are winning with the developers, you're going to be able to actually train your developer tools better than anybody else. No one can train developer tools better than Musk can at this moment in time. And that's got to be scary if you are someone like Microsoft making this point, which is simply that we can't train anything because
I
we don't really have a horse in the race.
I mean, they do. They had all of this open source. They had all of GitHub.
Yes.
So all of the code. They had it all. I just look, I don't work there. I don't understand what's going on there, you know, but Wall Street seems to keep thinking that Microsoft and Google are good bets. Probably are. I'm not an investor like you are, Harry, or
Yeah.
have the background there. I'm kind of like more deeper in the stack and will tell you where the ball's going to go, and that might take 10 years. Uh, but Google and Microsoft have to really figure out what they want to do about this, because I don't think what they're doing is sufficient, in my opinion, on the short term.
Right.
And I think that I haven't read Satya's, but just listening to you, it sounds like the same thing Karp's saying is like it's a bit fear provoking, right? It's like, well, if you give it to them, they're gonna get your alpha. And I actually think that's probably more true than not. But
Yeah.
most
I
companies don't need to worry about that.
Yeah, I think most don't, because a lot of it's about distribution, a lot of it's about real world. It's not all software businesses out there in the world. There's plenty of physical goods in the world. I mean, I'm looking around my room here, and I'm like, I need a couch.
But if you're
I'm not
Kroger,
buying an Anthropic
yeah,
couch, right?
but if you're Kroger, one of the big market companies in the world, right?
Yeah.
And you're using Anthropic or OpenAI, it's unlikely that those companies are going to go into the market business,
No,
right?
not with a 3%, 2% margin
Yeah,
business. But yeah, then again, if you listen to Chamath, he would say that on the margin, the ROI for a lot of these extra models is about 1 or 2%. So who knows? Maybe that starts to look like a good business.
maybe.
You know, I,
Unlikely because it's so physical. But if
yeah,
you're a pharmaceutical company, I wouldn't dare give any of my information to any of these guys, or a financial company, right?
right. But look, if you think about software development and just software tools, and you look at what Anthropic has rolled out, they basically took all of Figma and said, we're going to roll out Anthropic Design. You were a customer one day, now
And
you're
I
our
use
enemy the next
and I
day.
use that app. I use that app.
Yeah, I use that app too.
It's
It's
not bad.
to me, it's so much easier than using Figma to me.
Well, and Figma goes back, like that goes back to the original
And
kind of
you're an expert
conversation.
Figma guy.
Yeah, but I like Figma, but the fact is that the way that Figma's paradigm was, I'm a designer and I'm going to open up my IDE and I'm going to start designing, and happy accidents are going to happen through the design process, the struggle of designing, and I'm going to actually come up with something, and then I'm going to, get a framework and then create a design system and go. Um, I think Anthropic's just sort of like, hey, like that whole paradigm, both with coding and designing, is over, and you're gonna have this like conversation with a tool, and we're gonna create design or we're gonna create code. And I think companies like Figma are wed to the original user that's just moving their mouse and keyboard around, and they're doing this design thing, which I think is the old school way of doing it. It's not a bad way. It's literally the best. It's made everything that we've used now. It's fine. But the new way is going to be different. And I think that innovation that Claude is really pioneering is remarkable, and I think they're more right than wrong. And I think everyone's going to catch up. And I have the new Figma, and I watched the whole Figma keynote, and they're jamming as much AI as in there as you can, but I think it's a mess. I think
Right.
it's a big mess. I think it's their ID with all this stuff. You can do all this stuff, and and when you look at what design is doing, it's just like it's a fundamentally different thing. It's just fundamentally different.
Yeah.
And I think Anthropic's design app is good, but it still sucks because you have to like kind of download it and then give it to Claude Code, and I think they're going to win there.
Yeah, you
I
know what
think,
I found recently? The latest update of their desktop app, for me anyway, and I'm sure for you as well. I can just click on the bottom left and it says design. I
yep,
click it, it opens a new window, and it has all my design stuff in there.
it's
And
getting better.
so yeah, so a couple weeks ago it was still stuck on the web basically. And now it lives in one app where I can actually do code. I can do co-work, which is where I spend most of my time. I can do chats, and I can do design, and I can sort of link them all together, all in one
Yep,
window or a couple windows, which is makes life pretty good. And look, and I think that's what we're talking about. I mean, to some degree, and I'd like to sort of transition it a little bit here and get to that point, which is there's a tension that I find between, sort of two things. We talk about these frontier models all the time. We write about them.
hmm
We talk to businesses about them and, who they should use, what they use, how they use it, et cetera. And then, then you sit there and go, well, there's open source models too, which is you don't have to give someone all of your data and you can run it on your own, little Mac Mini at home or your MacBook Ultra or whatever, whatever the high end version is. Um, and there's this, kind of price uh, tension, and then there's the difficulty of doing it. And so you've seen, where we've written and and it's sort of it's interesting writing this stuff is that it's pretty clear that for the vast majority of tasks running an open model is just cheaper and figuring out a way to break your tasks up into chunks and say 80% of this goes to the cheapest model that's open source that just lives in our closet and 10% goes out to a mid-level model and 10% goes out to a high-level model. And that would kind of make sense if if you think about it. Um, the problem is that it is damn hard to do it.
yeah,
And
it's
it is technically difficult to set up if you're the average person, if you're the average company. It is hard to come up with the harness that breaks up tasks in that way. And, basically open source dollars seem to have fallen from, almost 20% to almost 10%. While it's become clearer that people should be doing that way. So
Yeah, I mean,
talk to me, how do you think we bridge that gap, or do people just basically keep sending Anthropic money?
I think, well, first of all, I think, look, I was around. I remember getting this software package called Slackware, which is sort of an early version of Linux, and it came on like, I don't know, you had to download. It was like this is when floppy drives. You had to like put them on floppies. I was like 45 floppies. And so I just have a little history here where when you're deep in it, you go open source is the right thing. And I think open source will rule the day. It just open source also means that you are hands-on pretty much the whole thing, right? It means you got to like know what model to download. You know how to provision your local hardware to run it, and that's on one side you get you get this. First of all, if you're into it, you get a lot of fun doing it, and you have full control, and it may be actually cost effective. On the other side, there's super convenience, which is Claude, which is you just have to get an account. Maybe it's $20, maybe it's $200 a month, and you get almost unlimited inference. And you want to run 50 agents, you want to run 50 chats at the same time all day long. So they're two spectrums, and I don't think I think we can't really compare them right now. Now somewhere in the middle is kind of like
go backwards, Anthony. Go back to your Linux days.
Yeah,
right. I mean, so what's the lesson from?
It takes a long time. So
right.
So
I still use a Mac. I don't use a Linux book.
Yeah, you don't. Yeah. But
and
everything
I've never
around
been given one.
Yeah, everything around you uses Linux. Like like Netflix uses Linux. Your Raspberry Pis have Linux on it. So all your embedded systems. So it's one. Meaning Amazon couldn't be AWS would not be AWS if they had licensed OSs and licensed software for everything they do. Just wouldn't be. Would never happened. Would never come to fruition. And so what I'm saying is like where I think the open source community is talking about models and open weights and all this stuff is it's giving the power, it's giving the really power to a lot of great people that will do something phenomenal with it, and that will become an internal product that might be sold back to you and you have no idea that it's running on open source. Like if you use eBay, it's running on open source software. If you use Uber, you're running on open source software. But it took that team and talent to orchestrate all that open source software to do something fantastic for you. Right. And so I think that it's not really a home user product yet. It's not. Go ahead.
What was Red Hat back in the day?
Red Hat was a flavor of Linux.
It was, yeah, okay, that's what I thought.
So Red Hat was like the first one that said, when Red Hat came out, they were like, "Hey, we're gonna kind of wrap this thing with a company infrastructure. It's still Linux, still a POSIX compliance Unix operating system, but we're gonna put some niceties around it, and you can call us for help." Right.
Right.
And
so it's Linux with a help desk.
Correct. And so but like that didn't really win. IBM bought them, or so on and so forth. It was just like the hyperscalers won. They just said, "Hey, we're going to put it all in the cloud." So what I think is going to happen is like Claude's going to still win. OpenAI will still win. I think that open source AI will, on the margin, run on local computers for the certain people. But I actually think enterprises will win, because if like you're an enterprise, like you'd written about Bridgewater and they worked with thinking machines.
Yep.
They have enough team and talent and money and insights to be like, yeah, hell no, we're not going to give this to Claude or OpenAI. You're like, this is all this knowledge that we're acquiring and have acquired. That's top secret. That's our alpha. What we will do is probably work with an outside vendor and an open weights local model, and we'll go ahead and provision $100K of CapEx in hardware locally. I'm not sure if they did that. I'm just saying, but you can imagine they put that on-premise hardware, their GPUs, do a training run, get the results they want, and then offer that data that inference back to their local customers, their i.e. their employees, through a set of GPU, and never have touched the open world. And I think that that's where open source is going to unlock businesses that are mature and smart enough to use it. And so when I'm hearing open weights and I'm hearing open source, I'm hearing, yes, it's going to come. You'll be able to run it on-prem. You'll be able to control your costs. You'll be able to control your data. You could literally put it on machines that are never touched the open internet, and you're going to see an explosion there. And you'll have people that will create control planes or harnesses that will like manage all that, and it will be a different sort of form of SaaS, cloud, on-prem, software. And you'll see a lot of companies do that. I think all your pharmaceutical companies, I think all your hedge fund financial companies will do that. And there'll be a place for all the, Anthropics and OpenAIs. You'll just have a duality world.
What's interesting is that, if you have a matrix and you say on one side is truly super high value processes, high value intelligence. So pharmaceutical companies, financial institutions, things like that, where they can make billions of dollars if they get it right, as opposed to, I can market this slightly better, or I get a better ad. And then you take the other side of the matrix, and you say, what models do I need? Really expensive models or really cheap models. What you're arguing is that the high model need coupled with the high outcome will ultimately go on-prem, simply because you don't want that information leaking out into the Mythos Fable 5 world, Grok, the latest version of Grok, et cetera, which, quite frankly, doesn't do a great job of explaining why you should be paying $1 trillion or $1.2 trillion for Anthropic, or $1 trillion for OpenAI, or whatever they
I think
whatever
it's
they
worth
want.
It.
Yeah.
But I think they're worth it. So I think that, by the way, when I say also on-prem, that also might also be on a hyperscaler in your own private VPC. So you could be renting the GPUs and all that stuff, or you could be buying them. I think right now for the average user, I think that in the near future, and certainly the long term, I think homes will have I think there'll be an appliance vendor that will sell you a local GPU machine that will run on your homeland. It'll almost look like a cable box. And anytime you have a question in the house, the local box will just be like, yeah, we got all that. Here's your recipes. Here's all this stuff. It's keeping track of all this kind of stuff. It's doing all this local inference.
Yep.
Kind of like an Xbox. Xbox has killer unified memory, GPU, etc. And anytime it needs to go and do some more advanced stuff, you'll have actually told it, like, yeah, go ahead and use OpenAI. I have an account, or Claude, whatever, and bring it back to you. But you'll have this like local AI router that will be watching all your stuff. And but for the big businesses, you'll certainly build all this infrastructure yourself. Going back to your point about OpenAI or Claude being $1 trillion company, listen, the TAM on this is forever. They're like, everyone's going to buy intelligence. Everybody, every college student, every high school student, every mom and dad, every law firm, every plumber, everyone's going to buy it. So I think people are misunderstanding how valuable this product is. It's not just for the developers. It's literally for anybody. You take a photo.
Developers are just the easiest and first use case.
They control it. They can look. You own the developer. This goes back to our other saying. You own the developer. The developer is going to use it. They're going to adopt it. They're going to convince their CTO. The CTO is going to talk to the CEO. The CEO is going to say, "What should we be doing for marketing?" They're going to say, "Use Anthropic, or use this, or use that, et cetera, et cetera." So owning the developer is a land and expand strategy that anyone that knows anything about businesses will do that.
Right.
It's for everybody, though. That's the thing. It's like, that's why I think actually OpenAI and Claude are worth every dollar that they're raising. I think that they could end up becoming the Apple of intelligence. I do not think that open source is going to erode that. It may erode it for the enterprise. But you said you owned Mac, but the enterprise uses Linux. they both coexist, and they're both big companies. Do you know what I
Yep.
mean?
Sure.
So that's my
Yeah. Yeah. It
thesis.
was a, it sounds like, there was a great debate on the All In podcast, which you sort of pointed out to me, and I took a look at the transcript of it, and, to kind of, you know, give it the 2-minute version. I mean, Sachs basically said, follow the dollars, right? Open source fell from, 20 to 10%, while the closed models climbed from, 80 to 90%. And his line, which I'll just quote verbatim, was, "The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. CTOs
Exactly.
want out. Their token bills are exploding, but they can't leave." And the lock-in mechanism, at least online got attributed to Sachs, but was really Nikesh Arora, um, was this: what do you do about memory, context, and history? And as long as you control memory, context, and history, you sort of control the switching costs, because it wasn't about the model. It was in that layer of that integration layer. It was always about the memory. Now, Chamath comes on, and he's going to take a contrary, view of that. And he basically, says, look, that 90% is completely blind to the usage it claims it's using. The scoreboard is blind in one eye. He uses GLM52 plus an open router, and he cuts his costs by 95%. But the lab's share of open router tokens has been falling since January. So, buyers are revolting. Uber ran through its budget, then capped it per engineer. Walmart, Cisco, Amazon, Meta, they all reined in the same quarter recently. Sachs went back and talked about the frontier, and, you basically, you stay open until you get to the frontier, then you close up, right? I think where we came out, and quite frankly, we wrote this morning, so it's out there. Everyone should go, read our signal to noise piece, the man behind the curtain at getkoai.com, which is that
It's online.
tokens, it's online. Tokens measure adoption, right? Dollars measure the lock-in, and the gap between them is who's actually getting paid. So routing ultimately is the skill that decides who captures the savings. So you own you have to own the process, because otherwise you're just renting the outcome. And I think that's
that's the control plane.
Yeah,
that's the control plane. And so I just the thing that I think the reason why the token cost is going so far up for all these companies is that the adoption curve of the engineer and the ability to get stuff done and the ability to spin up sub-agents is becoming vogue, and therefore your adoption curve goes up. And I think that there are some quotes saying that, like, oh yeah, but we're only seeing 5% efficiency or increase in efficiency with token spend. But I feel like token spend is going to continue to go up until people mature and know how to use everything that they know how to use.
Correct.
And then they'll become sophisticated buyers.
Yeah, I think we would both agree that I know, as a podcast, we're supposed to have, harsh banter between each other and really go at it. But the truth of the matter is, I think we agree on this point completely, which is that we're in the early education phase for almost every company and every human being out there that's using these tools. And the tools are changing so much that no one could be an expert at them unless you're actually building them, because they're new every 6 to 8 weeks.
Yeah, they're being invented as we speak. Now, the reason why I think we have this piece here, the escape hatch and the price tag, and we talk about owning your control plane and all this kind of stuff, which is, it's kind of jargony. The point being, we're saying is, like, look, you don't own the electricity. You're not going to own the GPU. You're not going to own certain layers, and you're going to rent some. But there's some rent and own, and we're talking you're owning your memory, owning your context, keeping that private, selectively routing to whatever Claude or Gemini or to OpenAI, like being able to route to those and getting reliable data back is really the name of the game. And learning how to, like, manage all that is the next 3 years. Right now, we're just passing our first 3 years. Open source and open weights and running 5.2 GLM is possible. You're not going to run that full model because you don't have enough RAM on your local GPU because you need 192, if not more, and you're not going to be able to parallelize it. So if your engineer wants to run 50 agents, that means you need 50 GPUs, you need 50 instances. So it's just at some point it becomes illogical to run it locally or cost prohibitive. But over time, you're going to see something arise. I think what you'll see arise is new versions of AWS that are super hyper focused on giving you GPU and models on the ready. And that's a unique, I think that's a unique position, meaning right now, if you wanted to run these things, it takes forever to spin them up in AWS.
Yeah.
They're not hot, they're cold. So you have to warm them up and you gotta get allocation for GPU. And I actually think that there'll be a new version of these kinds of companies where you have bare metal and it's almost like a trading desk. You say, I need 7,000 GPUs. I need them in 15 seconds, all running this model. And they just pop up online immediately.
Yeah. That's going to be an expensive ask.
That's an expensive ask, but that's what people will need. Because if you're sort of a hedge fund and you have a new investment thesis and you need to do a large run or a large set of inferences, you're going to need that. You're not going to be able to afford to keep that idle or operating. So there'll be this new hyperscaler that's like inference and training hyperscalers that will emerge that will offer you something that Amazon and those guys can't,
right.
or Google can't.
Yeah, I mean, what you're talking about is peaker plants in the summer, right? You're talking about,
Yes.
I need more electricity and I need it now because it's 95 and everyone just turned on their air conditioner.
Correct.
And I can't keep these plants running 24/7 because that's just complete waste of time. But I'll pay on the margin, for the peaker at that right moment. So
yeah, and there's companies that are doing that now, that are becoming highly valuable that will offer you fast sandboxes in the cloud for agents. And I think you're going to see a rise of that, and I think that will be a very powerful business. And I would invest in those businesses. And I actually think there'll be a need for local AI that looks like some sort of Xbox at your house that your whole house can use, and the data never goes anywhere; it just stays local.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, if I were one of the main models, I think I would just adopt that model anyway, which is go back to my enterprise clients and just say, listen, if you want peaker capacity, you're just going to pay for it, and I'm just going to throttle my normal max customers, because they'll just grumble, but they'll eat it because they don't really need the capacity. So if it takes a minute and a half versus a minute to really think about an answer, you don't really know why that's happening, right? But in the background, they're just running an optimization of queries. They shouldn't all be equal. Someone's willing to pay more, like everything else in capitalism. So it's interesting. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, you started down this road, and I think let's get to the last kind of beat of this of this podcast, which is sort of the mood. And I started out in the intro sort of saying that as we see more models come on and more changes happen, I think we become kind of numb to them. And it's like, a couple more models dropped, and okay, now we're going to have a couple breathless reviews of the things, and then everyone's going to go back to business and just keep running, and we'll realize that all the new capacity that just came on, there's 2% of the world that can use it, and 98% of the people are still making cat videos with these things, and so it's sort of
still important.
Yeah, it's still important. I mean, I love the cats busting in and playing, strange mariachi music in the middle of the night. It's one of my favorite memes. But the model race continues to be loud. But the business questions, kind of become louder also to some degree. You talked about being worth every cent because, the TAM is infinite effectively.
Yeah.
Look, CapEx, you spend money on CapEx, you increase capacity. The demand out there is obviously real. If Google's renting from SpaceX, there's more demand than people can meet. And it always looks insane when you're building all this stuff. It looked insane when you were building the internet. It looked insane when you were laying fiber optics, and inevitably, long-tailed assets have to be built ahead of short-term,
Yeah.
commerce. It always happens. You overbuild, there's a crash, assets change hands. But at the end of the day, people utilize them, right? If you want to talk about just stocks, like 40% of the S&P 500's in 10 names at this point. CapEx outrunning like revenue by like 50%. Um, that looks a lot like, you know, uh, going back to, the fiber optic days, right? It
Hmm.
looks an awful lot like that. And you would argue, I mean, Chamath argued it in the All In podcast, that the cost of tokens is doubling every 45 days for maybe a 5% max productivity.
Yeah.
We've already asymptoted, he said. And so, like, you sort of look and say ROI from a whole bunch of companies, like 1%. So not worth the cost of capital right now. Um, and that's sort of a very negative view. But as Gerstner said in the same podcast, we're so early that nobody cares, right? And just to
Yeah.
to attribute the quotes where they belong, right? And they're probably both right, right?
I think they're both right.
Right.
That's what Brad says too. Like
Right,
they're
it's too early, no one cares, and right now, yeah, you're not really seeing those returns, and it's gonna, like, no one cares till they care, and then everyone tries to jump through a very narrow door, and everything gets smoked.
yeah, I'm
But if you have a long enough view, you're okay,
yeah, and
right?
I think American investors and in general don't have long enough views, and they're not engineers, and they don't see what's happening, and
No,
so they
they
second guess everything.
they don't get paid to have a long view,
Right?
right?
They don't.
They get paid to be right tomorrow.
And well, just a quick question, like on all, like if we did a case study on the global crossing and WorldCom and all that kind of stuff, and how everyone, those companies literally went bankrupt, et cetera. Enron had something that also some bandwidth selling
Yeah,
stuff. Um, but at the end of the day, all of that bandwidth is probably still making money,
yes.
right? And
the
so
the, the cap structure took a bullet to the head.
yeah, so the
But the
financial chicanery that goes on, and I think chicanery is probably mostly negative, but I don't mean it that way. But the financialization of all this
yeah,
starts to look really uh scary and just crazy. And what I'm just saying is, like, to me, this is the internet all over again. It's like we moved from like fax machines and teletypes in the 80s, and in the 90s we started gearing up for internet, and in the 2000s we built it out. In the late 2000s we ended up with Ubers and all these things, and everyone's happy and everyone gets it, right? Now we're moving to a new sort of systems that are going to be commonplace in the way we interface with all kind of technology, which means that there's like rigid software coupled with like some sort of intelligence built into it, and that intelligence will require infrastructure that is probably in some sort of hyperscaler, and we're shifting towards that. And so we're building out essentially the highway system and railway system and telecommunication system all at the same time. And it looks like we're overbuilding, but I believe that we're probably not. And
yeah. Well, you could argue based on the last quarter's earnings calls that we have so far underbuilt in certain areas, and we've probably overbuilt in others. And I would argue that we've underbuilt in, I'll call it peaker capacity, right? Just the ability to meet the demand for AI, and we've overbuilt on the model side because you can build the models quicker than you can the physical capacity.
the
Right.
models, I think there's many scientists that have said if the model stopped being built, like not no new net model, we're still in a society that has enough model to wrap it with really great control planes, harnesses, whatever you want to call it, that could do amazing things. But the inference for all those models to run still needs to be built. So
Yeah.
we we're moving there, and I think the finance guys, they're really smart, and I know you're a member of that class, and you have to figure these things out to see how it all pencils out. And I'm sort of from the other side where it's like, no, this is where it's going. And everything that you're planning for on the finance side is probably, you're underbidding it right now. And
Right, and you just look, you just have to make sure that you can, survive it, right? The global
yes,
crossings of the world and the level 3s, they all went bankrupt, right? So the equity holders in those things, you know, went under. Now, was it the initial funders? No, they probably got out on the IPO or shortly after, but it was the public market sometime after that, and the bondholders who bought bonds at par took a bath as well. But ultimately, like I said, the assets are in the ground and they are being utilized.
yeah, you probably need more.
As a matter
Yeah.
of fact, we are utilizing those assets at this second, right?
We would
The
never be able
internet
to do
runs
this.
over it.
Yeah, we would
Yeah.
never be able to do a
So
live audio recording
no, and
without
I,
it.
yeah, and I also look. I've been in a sort of an active uh, discussion slash negotiation, for something personal, and and it's sort of a the family decision process, et cetera, et cetera. Um, and I have Claude sitting there with every email, every conversation on the phone. Claude is a part of it. And so when I said to my wife this morning, I said I'd like to move forward on this project. And she said, "Okay, can you give me just give me a summary of the thing, like a, financial summary. I know you've been working on it, but, give me a summary." I just went to Claude and said, "Could you take the last 8 weeks and summarize this, please, for my wife, and make it so that it's really clear, you know, why what the conclusion is that I came to and why it could be wrong and how it could be right, and under what circumstances is this a great deal and under what circumstances is
Yeah,
it a lousy deal, and if it's a lousy deal, what amount of money have we wasted, on
I,
the thing?"
I'm gonna have to do that as well.
Yeah, and right, but it is, it's fascinating, right? That took me, 20 minutes worth of work to, go through 4 iterations of that, just me reading it and then saying, "Actually, take out this sentence, put in this, I look at it this way slightly," whatever it is. Um, so to me, that intelligence already lives with me now, right? It is part of
You're not going
my
back.
no, I'm not going back. I mean, can I go back? Sure, I can go back. Do I wanna go back?
But
No.
what? Let me ask you a question. Wouldn't going back kind of suck?
Um, yeah, it's look,
It
I
would
think,
suck.
yeah, it's to me, it's like going to 4K TV, right? You went from standard def to high def to 4K, and it's like, if you ever come across a standard def TV channel now on your, if you're actually watching on a TV, since most of these kids now
Yeah.
watch on their phones, but if you have an actual TV screen, um, and you find a standard def movie, it's like it could be your favorite movie, and you may not wanna watch it because it looks so crappy. Um,
Yeah,
and s
to me, it was like the internet. Like I had cable TV and internet, and I was poor. And I'd always just say, I'll just cut cable. I'm not watching any of this stuff. I'm on the internet all the time. So it's like one or the other. So if it was coming down to like, hey, you can't have your $200 a month account for your Claude subscription, like I'm like, yeah, I'm not changing that. And so that's where I think the
I'm gonna go
numbers are at.
donate blood.
Yeah, I think that's where the numbers are at. I think it's like you take 500 million people that are going to sign up to pay $200 a month. I think that's the number.
Yeah.
Not to mention the
I
businesses. That's
It's
the number.
actually it's sort of an interesting question now, people always say, you can pry my phone from my, cold dead hand, and you sort of look at that and go, "Actually, is it?" It's not the phone, because we're not. It's not. I don't need the phone to talk to people. I can do that over email or chat or FaceTime or Slack or any of the
It's the
communications
computer.
protocols.
They're saying computer from your
Yeah, it's
hand.
the computer, but is it the computer or is it the actual? Is it actually like, I can't give up TikTok, or I can't give up Facebook, or I can't, or I can't give up Instagram, or like, what exactly is it that you can't give up. And I think for me, I think texting my friends and family and talking to Claude, because I do spend probably a potentially unhealthy amount of time
No,
having
you yeah.
discussions with Claude. I got into it for 4 hours the other day on, like, the Save America voting bill,
No, I
like
mean
the like
you are an expert. I mean, but listen, we talk about the way you speak with Claude because I find it fascinating because you use it so well. Do you know what I mean? Like in a way that like a programmer uses it to sort out like how to write a piece of software. Like you're using it to sort out like how like an argument or a position, and Claude becomes a very like tireless intellectual debater. And when you're trying to find synthesis, you need a debater. You need
yes.
to someone to find the antithesis. And I know that you know how to like put it in positions where you're like, yeah, well, steel man this or straw man this,
Yeah.
or and it's like it's very powerful to have that ability. And that's what I was saying is like I don't think once people figure out how to use this stuff, whether for their business or pleasure or both, they're not getting off of it. And they're not going to move to some open source thing that they have to run themselves. They might find a different model provider that'll be less than 200, but they're not moving off of it. Period.
Where I would synthesize all of this is that um, AI as we have it now, again, no further iterations of the models. The models are what they are today. Just give me that model. And I would say that there's probably never been a more powerful product that has been shipped to humanity all at once with literally no user manual whatsoever in
None.
order to get the most out of that product. You can, it's not like this is, some sort of like duct tape, right? Where there's 8 billion uses for duct tape. There's 8 billion uses for the AI, and you just, unless you mess around with it or unless you have an intuitive, knowledge of
I
having
mean, it's
conversations
natural
with,
language. The
yeah,
user manual was talking
it's talking,
in
but
any language
right, but
and
how many,
seeing.
right,
By the way, how many times do you take photos of stuff and ask it, "What the hell is this?"
uh, yeah, yeah, I've found that a lot of times it's easier. It's easier for me, for example, when I'm working on my golf swing and I go to a TrackMan or something like that. Rather than me putting in the data, it's easier for me to take a picture of the data and just put it and just give it the
Yes,
picture and say, "Here's my data,"
right.
and it just says, "Okay, great, I've read it.
Yeah, it's
Great.
yeah.
What happened on swing number 12? Like that one's way off." So yeah,
So we're not
it's
going back. So the finance model, Harry, to me is every sort of working professional needs a $200 a month account. Maybe it's not 200, maybe it's 100. That's
yeah.
a big number.
Yeah, and it could be that what happens is that the physical infrastructure gets ahead of the model use, and the physical infrastructure is where all the capital is going into, not the models themselves necessarily. The models themselves are relatively inexpensive,
Yeah.
relative to massive data centers and power plants and things like that. And so it could be that those are the guys that take it in the head at some point in time because they get too far ahead of themselves, or they get too leveraged, or whatever it is. But the model companies themselves, maybe it's just better to be, kind of an asset light model like that, and you'll be okay. Because, like you said, the TAM is ultimately it's
By the way,
not 7 billion people, but it's it could be 5 billion of the people. I mean, how many people have phones at this point?
yeah,
It's
the
probably
world.
4 or 5 billion people.
Yeah.
So it's
So,
probably something like that'll be paying maybe not $200 a month because they can't, but
but it
it's
goes
it's a
down.
lot.
But I think that like we'll end here. I do think that there's also always just a few providers of infrastructure. Like you only have one sewer system going to your house. It's like you just need one. You only have
Yeah,
one power company coming to your house
until it breaks, in which
until it breaks.
case,
Then you wish you had two.
yeah, wish you had a
But you
redundant.
know what I'm saying? So we might end up with a duopoly or some version of that. Like technically, you have AWS and you have Azure and you have Google. Like it's not that many. You don't have like 400 hyperscalers. Do you know what I mean? You might have 400 models or 4,000, but
Yeah,
it's sometimes when you get the electrical, you get the chip, And then on top of that is applications, and you'll have lots of them. So I actually think it's going to be, I think that I'm long on all this stuff. Maybe I'll be wrong, but we'll find out.
Long, wrong, and never in doubt. That's good. All right. Well,
All right, Eric,
let's leave it at that
let's
for the week.
wrap it.
And
Talk to you later.
we'll see you next week.
All right, buddy.